And then another huge part of the economy is obviously agriculture. So how do you plan on supporting ag producers?
Boy, that's a really long answer, right? So I believe that we need to keep growing our rural economy with wind and ethanol. I feel that we haven't really done a good job of tapping all the markets in our state for ethanol right now. And now with the movement to be greener, ethanol is actually a greener option here in Nebraska. And we know that when it comes to corn and ethanol, that's something that we need to keep moving forward. So we know that ethanol has also helped a lot of communities with their federal clean air standards, right? So it's doing dual duty, but I like wind too, because it can create second incomes for a lot of our farmers. Instead of having to drive into town and work at the local Walmart, so your family has that second income when things are tough on the farm. You can put wind energy on your property and generate a second income that way. So I'm a big proponent of both ethanol and wind. And I had to write down, because that question, like I have a long list and I finally had to write it down because I knew that I wouldn't remember everything. So I'm going to actually read it. And I'm sorry about that. We need to build a pipeline of well-trained workers and support safe workplaces with fair wages when it comes to meat and poultry processing. We really need to back private lenders that invest in independently owned food processing and distribution infrastructure. And we've done that in the legislature this year. We definitely need to help the little guys. We need to strengthen the financing system for independent processors. The product of USA labeling, I think, is really important. And I know that happens at the federal level. I actually have a legislative resolution that we're going to do on the 59th day in support of that. I think that it's unfair when these companies can come from other countries, and then the meat gets to the United States. And even though it's raised overseas, if it's processed here, then it says product of USA. So that hurts our cattlemen. So we need to make sure that we protect our cattlemen with labeling. I think that we need better transparency when it comes to our cattle markets so the ranchers really can get a fair price. I want to make sure that we really promote, and I talked a little bit about this, innovation and technology when it comes to our farmers. We talk a lot about technology, or I talk a lot about technology when it comes to our farmers. And I think when people hear that, lots of times they think a price tag is involved, but we have an opportunity to really expand and diversify ag in Nebraska if we partner better with the University of Nebraska. And to be really frank, the reason our farmers do so well in Nebraska has a lot to do with the research that's been done at the university. But we need to make sure that we find ways to create really stable jobs in rural Nebraska. So those that live on the smaller farms that actually have to have a second income can generate that second income. So it's a long list of how we help rural Nebraska and farmers. But for me, what I want to make sure that we do when it comes to Nebraska farmers is I want to make sure that they have the tools that they need to really be successful. And what does that mean? Well, I think that means different things depending on where you live in Nebraska. We know the right to repair is really important to a lot of our farmers. That's a really big expense when you have to wait several days to have somebody come and help reprogram the computer on your combine, right? So it can be simple legislation like that. It can be about the waterways. We need to make sure that we protect our waterways here in Nebraska because water is life. We need to make sure that when our farms are in crisis, that we're in front of it and not behind it. Again, I talk about that a lot, right? We don't plan accordingly. We'll wait till they're in crisis. We'll wait till the farms start closing down. Then all of a sudden, rural Nebraska has a crisis and we're trying to put in affordable housing and we're trying to give them money. We're trying to make it better. Why aren't we in front of it? We need to continue to support our poultry, our meat, our egg processing plants. We need to continue to support the small farmers. We need to continue to support farm to table. And we need to make sure that we work well with the federal government. I think that that's something that's kind of been lacking here in Nebraska. If there are funds from the federal government to help our farmers, we need to take those funds. If there are funds to help us with our infrastructure so our farmers can get their products from point A to point B to make our roads better, we need to take those funds. If there is funds from the federal government to help us with the technology of AI so we can make sure and maintain our roads in a way that is cost effective and affordable, we need to take those funds, because those funds at the federal level, yes, are taxpayer dollars, but also yes, are taxpayer dollars, right? People are like, well, that's just more of our tax dollars. Well, yeah, but you've already paid them. Why wouldn't we use them for the benefit of all Nebraskans? So we need to make sure, again, we need to grow our rural economy with ethanol, with wind. We need to be really cautious and protect we need to protect people's eminent domain. That's another issue that I'm really concerned about, especially with another pipeline trying to come through Nebraska. We know that right now a foreign company owns the property where the pipeline was supposed to go through, the Excel pipeline was supposed to go through before, and there's nothing we can do about it. They can do whatever they want with that property. So even though there's no pipeline, we know that eminent domain, where we're taking people's property, is a big problem in Nebraska. And there's a lot of big projects coming up in the future. And they've already said we're going to use eminent domain if we need to. Property rights in Nebraska is really important, right? Property rights isn't just about eminent domain when it comes to rural Nebraska. It's also about being able to eat the food that you grow in the ground, being able to drink the water that's in rural Nebraska in your wells, being able to breathe clean air. You know, property rights is about being able to enjoy your property that you pay for. So when it comes to things like that, we need to do a better job of keeping the eye on the prize, taking the funds that are available. If we had taken the funds that are available for us instead of doing this bizarre us versus them thing that has to do with politics and has to do with party, Nebraska would be in a much better place.
And then moving on to public health and burnout, we've heard from nurses and doctors and other people in the healthcare field that they feel burnt out because of COVID. So what are your plans to help that, and also make healthcare more accessible for people in rural areas too?
So again, that's been another place that we've already funded with this budget. We are definitely going to be giving funding to healthcare workers as an incentive to keep them here in Nebraska. One of the things I've done as a state senator is push forward something called Interstate Compacts. Interstate Compacts allow us to bring people into the state without having to go through the hurdles of licensure. If they belong to the compact, it also allows our staff to cross state lines to go into other states and work. So like if you're in Omaha, you can go into Council Bluffs and work, and vice versa. So removing hurdles to employment is one way that we can help the healthcare industry, one of many ways we can help the healthcare industry. But we know that in 2019, I know there was like $760 million that hospitals in Nebraska paid out in uncompensated care. And we've not done anything in support of that. We know that 53% of our critical access hospitals right now are going towards financial crisis. We've got a huge crisis in front of us. And one of the reasons they're in crisis is that, again, we talk a lot about Nebraska, right? We don't plan accordingly. We have known for years that we need to increase the Medicaid reimbursement rates to hospitals. We're just now doing that in our budget this year. So again, we've allowed them to languish and to suffer. And so think about it. You've got this healthcare crisis with the pandemic. You've got hospitals who are struggling because the state isn't pulling in their fair share. How do you incentivize your staff when you can barely afford to keep the doors open? And we know that there's already been rural hospitals that have closed here in Nebraska as a result of it. So we've got a good start. We're going to incentivize, we're going to bonus again. We've got the ARPA funds, and that's been very beneficial, but that's a Band-Aid. So what we need to do, and I'm going to go back to this again. We've known for 20 years before the pandemic, there was going to be a nursing shortage. And we did some feel-good legislation when Governor Heineman was in office that really didn't result in a whole lot of a big increase in nurses. Right? We've got to stop doing that. We've got to have a plan. We have to bring all the hospitals together, and we need to start supporting them for programs like what I call Grow Where You Are program. So we know that, say that you're a housekeeper in one of the hospitals, or a maintenance person in one of the hospital. It's somebody who's been involved in the day-to-day activities and know what to expect when it comes to a hospital environment. Those are really good people that we should be recruiting to be techs, to be nurses. But we don't do that. And then would we want young people to come and work in Nebraska? What do we have to offer them? And people are going to say, well, people won't move here because property taxes are too high. Well, actually, if you look at data, young people that leave Nebraska don't leave Nebraska because property taxes are high. They leave Nebraska because they have better paying opportunities, communities that offer them more leisure time things to do, jobs that offer more flexibility. So we need to address the healthcare worker shortage in a way that it creates sustainable results. And so the ARPA funds is a start. But the big key is to make sure that these hospitals are financially sound, and they can't be financially sound until the state plays the appropriate role, which is to make sure that the Medicaid reimbursement rate is at an acceptable level. And then if the hospitals don't have to worry about closing their doors, they can help address issues involved with financing their staff. What we're seeing is traveling nurses who they have to pay a lot more than the people that are on staff, right? And so they can't close that gap, because when you're in a crisis and you don't have the staff, you have to keep bringing those people in. We need to help them get back up to par so they don't have to keep bringing people in, so they can start doing the Grow Where You Are programming. We need more techs. We need to reduce hurdles to employment. We need to look at the criteria when it comes to being a nurse, when it comes to being a tech. What can we do to remove hurdles that make you have to go to school longer? What do we do to make sure that the starting wages are fair and competitive? And what can we do to make sure that we lift them up? We went from a society where people were banging pots and pans and baking cookies and bringing meals to our hospital staff, to stories that people are in COVID wings and still denying that they have COVID, and throwing water bottles at nurses and refusing medications. We've taken a noble profession and made them victims by not lifting them up during this pandemic. And so just like our teachers, just like a lot of our other professions, our nurses, our doctors feel underappreciated. They feel, and I have to be really frank, I feel our executive branch had a lot to do with it during the pandemic. If we don't support science, the science, by the way, is really important financially to Nebraska. If we didn't have Nebraska medicine, we didn't have the University of Nebraska, economically, we would be in a really bad place. We need to make sure that our executive branch lifts up the medical community and supports the medical community and supports the science. Because part of what's going on right now is a lack of respect for our healthcare workers. And that's ridiculous. It starts at the top. So if we want to help them fully fund Medicaid reimbursement, we need to remove licensure hurdles. We need to make sure that when people are working in the healthcare industry, that we lift them up, that the people who make the policy in Nebraska show their support in the policy that they make. And we need to have an environment that allows people to want to come to Nebraska. And one of the things we need too is we need bipartisan support when it comes to immigration policy. We need better immigration policy, because if you look at like the Med Center, you can't walk down a hallway and not meet somebody who's from another country, right? Because we need those doctors, we need those nurses that are very qualified to come to our country and help us out, because we have this shortage. But we can do better when it comes to bipartisan immigration policy, and it comes to professionals like doctors, nurses, and other people in the healthcare industry. So it's multifold. Like every question you ask has like 20 answers, right? But it's because there's not one answer. This is why we have to keep trying to find a way to bring people together. You know, I know that there's 78 counties that don't have practicing psychiatrists. We know we have a mental health crisis in Nebraska. We knew at the beginning of the pandemic that was going to get worse in Nebraska. But can you point out any legislation that helped make that better, that happened during the pandemic? Not really. I had an interstate compact bill for psychiatrists that got passed. That was my solution, right? Remove hurdles so it makes it easier for people to work in the state of Nebraska. But we know that there's 17 counties in Nebraska where there's no pharmacists. And what people don't understand too is that when we close down things in rural Nebraska, then where do they go for their services? They go to urban Nebraska. So we've created a secondary issue. So you may have to wait 6 months to see a doctor if it's a specialist in Omaha, because we're taking the burden on of all the hospitals and medical centers that are closing in rural Nebraska. So we've got to find ways to incentivize. Some of that's going to have to be housing, which we talked about earlier, and finding creative ways to do communities. You could do a medical community just like you could do an artist community, right? Making it affordable for them to live, giving them potential to buy a house in the future. But mostly the state needs to put on its big boy pants and take responsibility for the problem that they caused, which was not reimbursing hospitals at an appropriate rate, which has caused them deep financial stress.
And my final question for you, in a brief sentence or two for people who are watching this, kind of like an elevator statement, I guess. Why should people vote for you?
So I'm a Nebraska girl, born in McCook, raised in rural Adams County, Nebraska, raised my family in urban Nebraska. The reason people should vote for me is that I don't participate in the political rhetoric of us versus them. I've never been about party. I've always been about policy. I've never been about special interest. I've always been about the people. I have a long history of successful legislation that has saved taxpayers tens of millions of dollars, protected our veterans, our senior citizens, and our military families and those most vulnerable, as well as the ag community. And I've done that because it's always been about who I'm working for. I know who I work for. I don't care about party. I'm a Nebraskan. I don't care about special interest. If you look at who funds my campaigns, you'll notice that I always do everything for about a fifth of what other candidates do. And that's because I believe in hard work. But really, if you're looking for somebody who's just going to take care of you and not be about special interest, but make it about Nebraskans, and who's going to quiet this us versus them narrative that is killing this country, I'm really the only candidate right now that has that narrative.
Thank you so much for your time this morning. I really appreciate it.